Hello again, welcome back to the office. And I've just managed to find an extra 5 or 10 minutes, so I thought I would answer one more question today. And this is another one from Omar, because you other guys aren't asking questions. So thanks, Omar. And you said there are some authors who are skilled in the art of fiction and history. True. But it's very rare that someone is equally good at both. In my opinion, Peter Ackroyd is a typical example of someone who's much better historian than a novelist. Do you think it's fair to say that one is an art and the other is a science, or are they more similar? I'm trying to decide. Well, Omar actually says he's trying to decide whether he would make a better historian or whether he'd make a better storyteller. That's an interesting one, actually. That's not something I'd thought of. However, when I set out to write a book, I can only talk from my own experience. When I set out to write a book, I have to know the history is right. I cannot put in anything that I know is wrong. Now, I was talking to Robin Young not that long ago, a lovely lady, and she's had enormous success with her books, the Brethren series and others. And her view was that history is there to be tinkered with. You can switch things around and play with it a bit. Yes, I agree to an extent. But for me, the history is a solid rail that I can hang my story on. If I think of, for example, the Vintner trilogy, where I'm talking about the Battle of Crécy, Siege of Calais, Battle of Poitiers. Take the first one, Fields of Glory. That worked because I found a huge number of books. I've got them here, but they're hidden behind piles of other books. But Froissart, for example, wrote his chronicles, and in that he gave a certain amount of information. Other people had more day-to-day chronicles of exactly what happened. So you can read in Edward III's legal histories, you can read books by different dukes and lords who were involved in the campaigns and so on, and you can get a pretty accurate feel for exactly where the army was, what they were doing on every single day. You can find out what the weather was like. There's a huge amount of information out there, and for me that underpinned the whole of Fields of Glory as an example, because I had a precise timeline. I knew where the army was going to be day by day. I knew where I could put my men. I knew that the army covered up to a 13-14 mile front, so my men could be at one end of that 13 miles or they could be moved up to the other end. Didn't really matter. There was a huge amount of flexibility, but tied to the precise history. So I was a historian for that aspect. But then the storytelling bit comes from when you invent the characters and their backstories and their reactions to things happening. That's the storytelling element, I think, because my books tend to be told from the perspective of a number of different people. I don't usually stick to one person unless it's something like Rebellion's Message, where I'm entirely first person. Most of my Templar series, the Pilgrim's War, the Vintner trilogy, Act of Vengeance, almost all of them are told from a number of different perspectives, because it's only getting the different perspectives of all the different people that you can see how they're reacting and relating to events as they happen. That makes sense? I think it does. If you're a historian, you're going to be slightly hidebound by sticking precisely to all the facts. Robin is a very good historian. She's also an extremely good writer, because she'll take those facts and she will twist them. But she can change the sequence of events in history, which I find not good. I wouldn't want that in my books. I prefer to stick to the accurate timeline and then develop my story through the characters. So I think you can be a historian and a novelist. I think Peter Ackroyd is a much better historian than novelist, but that's because he's got a fairly spare style of writing. Other people are a bit like that. To an extent, Fred Forsyth is rather like that. He's a really good investigative journalist, a bit like a historian really when you think about it. So he's very good at finding facts and working on those facts. Peter Ackroyd does the same thing, he finds his facts. But he's more interested in the facts and the history, as Fred Forsyth is, rather than the characterisation of all the people involved. I mean, Forsyth, one of his best inventions probably was Cat Shannon, who was the lead mercenary in Dogs of War. And Shannon, you do get a feel for him, but he's not a particularly well-rounded character. There's a girl in the story, son of, was it Manson, his horrible capitalist. I think it was Manson's daughter. And she's quite an interesting character, but there's no depth to the character whatsoever. So I think that you get some people who write books where you don't get as much characterisation as I personally like. Then again, a lot of people don't like my style of writing. I mean, to be fair, I often get comments that my book was slow up until a certain section, because I basically give an awful lot of background and I give characterisation a lot more emphasis maybe than other writers do. So I don't think you can tell whether you're a good historian or a good novelist until you actually write. Now, I would suggest, if you're keen on writing, this is Omar obviously, I would suggest that the best thing to do is to try to write a novel that is historical based, because then you'll discover whether it's the historical aspect that you really like or whether it's the character, the characterisation and the novel writing section. There's a thought for you. So, whether you're a better historian or novelist, I would say basically sit down and try to write a novel. And that means you do your history as well, and then I would write out what the history actually means. So for example, if I was rewriting Fields of Glory, I would write out the battle scenes at Cressy, and then after doing that, as a sort of synopsis of what I'm planning to do, so I've told the story there in bald terms, Clip did this, Beringer Frepper did this, and then you're not doing any characterisation, you're not getting inside the minds of those people, you're writing just the history. If you enjoy that, all well and good. If you then rewrite it, but this time you're telling it from the point of view of those characters, so then you're saying Clip was thinking how terrible this was. He saw somebody get his arm cut off, he saw an arrow going through the head of the bloke next to him. It made him angry, it made him furious, he could feel the rage bubbling up. He fired an arrow and then switched scenes. Beringer Fripper was at the bottom of a bog and he heard the charging horses thundering over his head. Those scenes aren't in the battle scene, don't worry, I've just made them up on the spot. But you see what I'm doing, I'm just talking about how the different characters perceived what was going on. That's the novelist bit. It doesn't involve a huge amount of exposition about, so Edward III moved his troops down to here, and then Sir John de Sully decided he was going to move up, and that meant that he had Clip move up to here, and he had Beringer going down there, but Beringer fell in a bog. That's the history bit, no characterisation. When you get into the minds of the different characters, that's when you're starting to write a novel. Does that make sense? That's going to lead to a bunch more questions, I'm sure. So I'm going to stop there, because this is the third video I've recorded for Scavengers in January. I'm going to leave it there, but there will be more videos in February. I hope you'll want to see them too. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks again for your patronage. It's all hugely appreciated. And I've now got to get back to Jack Blackjack 5, which is still the working title. I haven't figured out what the hell to call it. And I've got to rewrite the end of it. 1 week to do it in. I need help. Thanks very much for watching. Take care. I'll speak to you soon. See you in February. Cheers.